The clatter of a fork on a porcelain plate is usually the loudest sound you hear at l'Orchidée d'Or, Manhattan's temple of haute cuisine. But on that Tuesday evening, a different sound shattered the hushed reverence. It wasn't the crash of a dropped tray, but the sharp, angry gasp of a man worth billions, followed by the dark splash of a $5,000 bottle of Chateau Margaux. The crimson liquid didn't just stain the floor, it drenched the pristine white uniform of a young waitress. All eyes snapped to the scene. The furious titan of industry and the girl he had just publicly humiliated. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. But what happened next wasn't what anyone expected. It was a single, quiet action from the waitress that would unravel a man's empire and change the soul of the restaurant forever. The air in l'Orchidée d'Or was a carefully curated symphony of quiet success. It smelled of truffle oil, old money, and the faint floral scent of the towering orchid arrangements that gave the establishment its name. Patrons spoke in hushed tones, their conversations weaving between multi-million-dollar deals and summer plans in the Hamptons. To work here was to be invisible, a silent cog in a machine of flawless service. For Ava, a 23-year-old law student at Columbia, it was a necessary performance. The uniform, a starched white blouse, a long black skirt, and a ridiculously flimsy apron, was her costume. The deferential smile was her mask. The tips paid for textbooks that cost more than a month's rent and fueled her caffeine-driven study sessions. Tonight, she was assigned to the most coveted and feared section, the corner booth reserved for Preston Vance. Preston Vance was not just a regular, he was a monument, a tech billionaire who had clawed his way to the top with a reputation for brilliant, ruthless innovation. He treated the restaurant like his personal dining room. He was tall, with a mane of silvering hair that looked artfully disheveled, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. Tonight he was particularly agitated, his voice a low growl that sliced through the restaurant's ambient calm. He was dining with a younger woman, Victoria, whose diamond necklace seemed to shimmer with anxiety every time he slammed his fist lightly on the table to emphasize a point on his phone call. "No, you tell Richardson that the due diligence phase is over," he snarled into his phone, oblivious to the other diners pretending not to listen. "The acquisition is non-negotiable. We close by Friday, or I walk and burn his entire company to the ground on my way out." Ava approached the table with the practiced grace of a phantom. In her hands, she held the prized bottle, a 1982 Chateau Margaux. Its selection had been a 10-minute ordeal, with Vance dismissing the sommelier with a wave of his hand and pointing at the rarest vintage on the list. Her job was simple: present the bottle, receive the nod, and pour with a steady hand. She presented the bottle, its label facing him. "The 1982 Chateau Margaux, Mr. Vance." He didn't even look at her, still barking into his phone. "I don't care about the optics. I care about the numbers." He gestured impatiently with his free hand, a sharp, dismissive flick that meant, "Get on with it." Ava positioned the crystal decanter and began the pour. The rich, ruby liquid flowed in a silent, perfect stream. She was focused, blocking out the tension radiating from the table. She had poured thousands of glasses of wine. It was muscle memory. And then it happened. As Vance ended his call with a vicious tap on his screen, he swung his arm back to place the phone on the table. He wasn't looking. His elbow, clad in a $1,000 suit jacket, connected sharply with Ava's wrist just as she was tilting the bottle back. Time seemed to slow down. The bottle slipped from her grasp, not crashing to the floor, but tipping forward in a horrific, graceful arc. A torrent of deep crimson wine, a liquid worth more than Ava's monthly salary, cascaded directly onto her chest and lap. It splashed across the pristine white tablecloth, pooling near Victoria's designer handbag. A few errant drops even speckled the sleeve of Vance's immaculate suit. The silence was instantaneous and absolute. Every hushed conversation died. Every fork paused mid-air. The soft melody from the grand piano in the corner faltered for a beat. 60 pairs of eyes, belonging to some of the most powerful people in New York City, were fixed on table 12. The wine was shockingly cold against Ava's skin, soaking through the thin cotton of her blouse and apron, clinging to her unpleasantly. The smell, a complex bouquet of blackcurrant, cedar, and violets, was suddenly nauseating. Preston Vance looked from his sleeve to the mess on the table, then to Ava. His face, already a mask of irritation, contorted into a canvas of pure fury. His stormy eyes narrowed into slits. "You incompetent idiot!" he roared, his voice booming through the cavernous dining room. The sound was a physical blow. Victoria flinched, her hand flying to her mouth. "Do you have any idea what you've done? This is a vintage 1982 Margot, and look at my suit. This is a custom Tom Ford." Ava stood frozen for a single second, the empty bottle still tilted in her hand. The blood drained from her face, but her eyes remained fixed on him. Inside her, a hurricane of panic, humiliation, and fear was raging. The cost of the wine, the suit, her job, her tuition, it all flashed before her eyes in a dizzying slideshow of disaster. This was it. The moment she would be fired, shamed, and possibly even sued. And then something else took over. A strange, cold calm settled over her. A survival instinct honed through years of hardship she kept hidden behind her polite waitress smile. She straightened her back. Her hand, surprisingly, was steady. Instead of bursting into tears or stammering apologies, she placed the empty bottle upright on a clean part of the table with a soft, deliberate click. She met Preston Vance's blazing glare, not with fear, but with a quiet, unreadable focus. She took a small step back, her soaked uniform dripping onto the Persian rug. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it was clear and steady, cutting through the thick, judgmental silence of the room. "It appears there has been an accident," she said, her tone perfectly level, almost detached. "Please allow me to get some club soda for your jacket, sir. It's the most effective way to prevent a stain from setting." The entire restaurant held its breath. It wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. There was no groveling, no panic, no admission of guilt. It was a simple statement of fact and a proposed solution, delivered with the composure of a surgeon announcing a complication during an operation. She had taken his bellowing rage and refused to accept it, handing back a quiet professionalism that was more shocking than any outburst could have been. Preston Vance was momentarily stunned into silence, his mouth slightly agape. He had expected tears, hysteria, begging. He had expected to feed his fury on her fear. Instead, he got calm, poise. It was like screaming at a marble statue. It only made him look more unhinged, his tantrum suddenly seeming childish and vulgar in the face of her incredible composure. The power dynamic he had tried to establish with his wealth and volume had just been subtly, but completely, inverted. And everyone in that room felt it. The echo of Ava's calm words hung in the air, a stark contrast to the crimson chaos on the table. For a moment, Preston Vance seemed lost, his rage momentarily deflated by the unexpected lack of a target. He looked at Ava, truly looked at her, for the first time that night. He didn't see a clumsy waitress. He saw a young woman whose unnerving stillness was a mirror reflecting his own boorish behavior. The eyes of the other patrons felt like physical weight on his shoulders. He was Preston Vance, He did not get shown up. His face hardened again, the brief confusion replaced by a cold, deliberate cruelty. "Club soda?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think a little club soda is going to fix this? Your incompetence has ruined a $5,000 bottle of wine and a $12,000 suit. Get out of my sight. You're fired." The words, "you're fired," were not shouted this time. They were delivered like a verdict, low and final. Before Eva could respond, the restaurant's manager, Monsieur Dubois, materialized at the table. A man whose entire career was built on placating the whims of the wealthy, Dubois was pale, his usually composed demeanor fractured by panic. "Mr. Vance, I am so terribly sorry," he gushed, bowing slightly, refusing to even look at Eva. "This is inexcusable, absolutely inexcusable. Please, allow us to take care of everything. Your meal is, of course, on the house. We will have your suit professionally restored at our expense. As for the girl..." He finally risked a glance at Eva, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fury. "She will be dealt with immediately. She is finished here." Eva felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Dealt with. Finished. She was no longer a person, just a problem to be disposed of. She looked at the faces around the room. Some were filled with sympathy, others with a detached, morbid curiosity, the way one might watch a car crash. Victoria, Preston Vance's companion, was studiously examining her manicure, her face a mask of practiced indifference, desperate to distance herself from the messy scene. "Come with me," Dubois hissed at Eva, his fingers gripping her arm just above the elbow. His touch was not violent, but it was firm, a clear signal that she was being escorted out like a criminal. As he steered her away from the table and toward the swinging doors of the kitchen, Eva kept her head high. She refused to let them see her crumble. Her mind was racing, replaying the incident frame by frame, his arm swinging back, the impact on her wrist, the angle of the bottle. It wasn't her fault. She knew it with a certainty that was both clarifying and utterly useless in this moment. The truth didn't matter here. In the gilded world of l'Orchidée d'Or, the customer wasn't just right, he was king, and Preston Vance was an emperor. The kitchen was a stark contrast to the dining room, a chaotic ballet of steam, clattering pans, and shouted orders in French and Spanish. The moment she and Dubois passed through the doors, the manager's placating demeanor vanished, replaced by a raw, unfiltered fury. "Are you insane?" he spat, his French accent thickening with his anger. "Do you know who that was? That was Preston Vance. He spends more in 1 month here than you will make in 10 years. He could buy this building and have it torn down for fun." "Monsieur Dubois, it was an accident," Eva said, her voice still steady, though a tremor was beginning to work its way up her spine. "He hit my arm." "I don't care if he drop-kicked you into the dessert cart," Dubois shot back, his face inches from hers. "Your job is to anticipate, to be invisible. You are not supposed to exist in a way that allows for accidents. You are a ghost who brings food and wine. And now, you have made a ghost of your career here. Go to the staff room. Get your things. You are not to set foot in my dining room ever again." He turned his back on her, already barking orders at the sommelier to prepare another, even more expensive bottle to send to Vance's table as a peace offering. The message was clear. She was dismissed, forgotten. Eva walked woodenly toward the small, cramped staff locker room in the basement. The adrenaline that had sustained her was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep, aching humiliation. She could feel the stares of the other kitchen staff on her back. They weren't unkind, but they were wary. She was a liability, a cautionary tale. Inside the locker room, The smell of stale coffee and cleaning supplies filled her nostrils. She leaned against the cool metal of her locker, the cheap lock feeling flimsy in her trembling hand. She finally allowed herself to breathe, and with that breath came the first wave of despair. Her uniform was cold and sticky, the sweet, cloying scent of the spilled wine a constant reminder of her failure. She had lost her job. It was more than just a job. It was her lifeline. It was the rent for her tiny apartment. It was her tuition payment, due in 3 weeks. It was the food she ate and the subway card that got her to class. Without it, her carefully constructed world, the one where she balanced the grueling demands of law school with the exhausting reality of survival, was about to come crashing down. She sank onto the hard wooden bench, pulling her knees to her chest, heedless of the wine soaking into her black skirt. The composure she had shown in the dining room felt like a distant memory, a role played by someone else. Here, in the dim, silent basement, she was just Ava, broke, jobless, and terrified. But as the first tear traced a path down her cheek, another feeling began to seep in, pushing back against the despair. It was a slow-burning anger. She hadn't been clumsy. She hadn't been incompetent. She had been publicly assaulted, verbally abused, and summarily fired to protect the ego of a powerful bully. Her legal training, the countless nights spent poring over torts and contracts, began to kick in. She thought about liability, about workplace safety, about wrongful termination. The world saw a waitress who spilled wine. She saw a clear case of negligence on the part of the patron, leading to a workplace incident for which she was now being punished. She stood up, her movements suddenly filled with a new resolve. Wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, she changed out of the ruined uniform, folding it neatly and placing it on the bench. She would not leave it crumpled in a heap. She dressed in her simple street clothes, jeans and a sweater, and gathered her belongings from her locker, a worn copy of a constitutional law textbook, and her worn-out sneakers. As she walked out of the staff entrance and into the cool night air of the alley behind the restaurant, she was no longer just a fired waitress. She was a law student with a case. And Preston Vance had just become her final exam. The restaurant had changed, all right. They thought they had extinguished a small flame, but they had just ignited a fire. The streetlights of the Upper East Side cast long, distorted shadows as Ava walked toward the subway station. Each step was a battle between the lingering sting of humiliation and the nascent spark of defiance. Why hadn't she cried? Why hadn't she screamed or begged for her job? Anyone else would have, and no one would have blamed them. But Ava was not anyone else. Her composure in the face of Preston Vance's wrath wasn't a fluke. It was a shield forged in a fire much hotter than a billionaire's temper. To understand Ava, one had to understand her father, Robert. He wasn't a lawyer or a businessman. He was a master carpenter, a man who believed that the strength of any structure lay in its foundation. "Anyone can build something that looks good, Ava," he used to tell her, his hands calloused but gentle as he showed her how to read a blueprint. But a true craftsman builds something that can withstand a storm. He had built their small house in a quiet Ohio suburb with his own 2 hands. He had also built Ava. The storm came when she was 16. Robert was diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of cancer. The medical bills piled up like snowdrifts, burying the family in a mountain of debt. The insurance company, a faceless corporate behemoth, found a loophole in their policy, a pre-existing condition no one knew about, and denied their claim. Ava watched her parents, 2 of the strongest people she knew, begin to break. Her mother took on double shifts at the local diner, her exhaustion etched into the lines around her eyes. Her father, a man of quiet strength, grew frail. But his frustration was the most painful thing to witness. He spent hours on the phone with insurance agents, his voice growing weaker and more desperate with each call. They were stone-walled by jargon, buried in paperwork, and treated like a number on a spreadsheet. It was then that Ava started fighting back. She was only 16, but she spent her nights in the local library, not studying for the SATs, but devouring books on insurance law and patient advocacy. She learned the language of the enemy. She drafted letters, quoted statutes, and filed appeals. She was methodical, relentless, and calm. When she spoke to the agents on the phone, she never raised her voice. She presented facts, timelines, and legal precedents with a chillingly adult poise. She knew instinctively that emotion was a luxury they couldn't afford. Emotion was what the insurance company expected. It was what they used to dismiss and discredit people. Calm, cold logic was their kryptonite. She didn't win. Robert passed away before the final appeal could be heard. The insurance company sent a form letter of condolence, and the bank foreclosed on the house he had built. Ava and her mother moved into a cramped apartment, but the defeat had planted a seed in Ava's soul. It wasn't about the money. It was about the injustice. It was about powerful entities crushing ordinary people simply because they could. It was on the day she packed her father's woodworking tools into a cardboard box that she decided to become a lawyer. She would build cases like her father had built houses, with an unshakable foundation designed to withstand any storm. Getting into Columbia law was a miracle, funded by a patchwork of scholarships, grants, and the high-interest loans she was now terrified of defaulting on. New York was a world away from Ohio. It was a city that worshipped power and wealth, the very forces that had destroyed her family. Working at Loche des Doors was a constant, painful reminder of that. She served men like the executives who had denied her father's claim, men who discussed leveraged buyouts over plates of food that could have paid her family's electric bill for a year. She had learned to separate herself from the role she was playing. The deferential waitress was a character. It allowed her to observe, and she was a very good observer. She saw the fragile egos behind the bravado, the desperation in the eyes of men trying to close a deal, the subtle power plays enacted over a wine list. She saw the cracks in their foundations. So when Preston Vance had exploded, something in her clicked into place. He wasn't just an angry customer. He was a case study. He was the insurance company in a Tom Ford suit. His rage wasn't personal. It was a tool of intimidation, a display of power designed to make her feel small and helpless. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Never let them see you shake. Her calm response hadn't been a conscious strategy. It was a deeply ingrained defense mechanism. She had retreated to the one place she felt safe, the cold, quiet fortress of logic. Now, sitting on the rattling downtown train, the reality of her situation came crashing back. Logic couldn't pay her rent. Precedent couldn't buy her groceries. She pulled out her phone and looked at her bank account. The balance was pathetic. Her tuition payment was a looming monster. The despair she had held at bay in the restaurant's basement began to creep back in. But as she stared at the screen, her mind was already working, analyzing, structuring. She wasn't just a victim. She was a witness. She reconstructed the scene, the position of the table, the timing of Vance's phone call, the exact way his arm had moved. It was a clear chain of events, a tort, specifically battery, the unwanted physical contact of his elbow, and negligence, his failure to act with reasonable care. The verbal abuse could be intentional infliction of emotional distress. The firing was a direct result of an incident he had caused. She started typing a memo on her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. She outlined the potential causes of action, the elements she would need to prove, the potential damages. Lost wages, emotional distress, punitive damages given Vance's malicious conduct. A small, wry smile touched her lips. For months, she had been reading about cases like this in textbooks, dissecting them in mock trials. They had always been abstract, academic exercises. Now she was living one. The anger was still there, a hot coal in her chest, but it was no longer a wild, consuming fire. It was fuel. She knew suing a man like Preston Vance was like trying to punch a battleship. He had armies of lawyers who specialized in crushing nuisances like her. They would bury her in motions, drown her in discovery, and paint her as a gold-digging opportunist. But as the train pulled into her station in a less glamorous part of town, she thought of her father again. He never shied away from a difficult project. He would measure twice, cut once, and face every challenge with quiet determination. Ava got off the train, the notes for her own case glowing on her phone screen. She didn't have her father's tools, but she had his blueprint for resilience, and she was about to start building. For 2 days, Ava lived in a suspended reality. She attended her classes at Columbia, her mind a split screen between lectures on civil procedure and the ever-dwindling number in her bank account. She sent out dozens of resumes to other restaurants, but the high-end establishments were a small, gossipy world. The story of the waitress who had crossed Preston Vance was likely already making the rounds. The few calls she got were for diners and coffee shops that wouldn't pay nearly enough to cover her expenses. The knot of anxiety in her stomach was a constant companion. Her meticulously crafted legal memo on her phone felt both like a brilliant plan and a delusional fantasy. She had the theory, but no resources. She couldn't afford a lawyer, and representing herself against Vance's legal team would be suicide. She was a first-year law student, not a seasoned litigator. It was like knowing how to design a skyscraper, but only having popsicle sticks to build it with. On the third evening after the incident, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number with a 212 area code. Probably another rejection. She let it go to voicemail, not having the energy to hear another, "We'll keep your resume on file." A moment later, a text message appeared. Ms. Navarro, my name is Genevieve Croft. I was a diner at l'Orchidée d'Or on Tuesday evening. I believe we should speak. I am a partner at Croft, Bellows & Snyder. Please call me at your earliest convenience. Ava stared at the name. Croft, Bellows & Snyder. It wasn't just any law firm. It was one of the most respected litigation boutiques in the city, famous for taking on complex, high-stakes corporate cases. A partner from a firm like that wanted to talk to her? Her heart hammered against her ribs. She took a deep breath, walked into her tiny bedroom for privacy from her roommate, and dialed the number. A calm, professional voice answered on the first ring. Genevieve Croft. Ms. Croft, this is Ava Navarro. You texted me. Ah, Ms. Navarro. Thank you for returning my call. I trust you are recovering from the unfortunate events of Tuesday. Her voice was warm but precise, each word chosen with care. I'm all right. I lost my job, Ava said, the words tasting like ash. Yes, I gathered that might be the outcome. It was a disgraceful exhibition, and you handled yourself with a level of poise that I have seldom witnessed, inside a courtroom or out, Ms. Croft said. I was at table 7. I had a clear view of the entire interaction. Ava's mind reeled. A witness, not just any witness, but a senior partner at a major law firm. I saw Mr. Vance strike your arm, Ms. Croft continued, her tone becoming firmer, more loyally. It was not a gentle bump. It was a reckless, angry gesture. I saw his subsequent tirade, and I saw Monsieur Dubois' craven capitulation. What I saw was a clear-cut case of assault, slander, and wrongful termination. The question is, Miss Navarro, what do you intend to do about it? Ava was stunned by the directness of the question. I'm a first-year law student. I've been thinking about my options, but I don't have the resources to take on a man who retains a law firm with 100 litigators on retainer. No, you do not, Ms. Croft finished for her, which is why I am calling. My firm, on occasion, takes on pro bono cases of significant merit, particularly when they involve a gross abuse of power. Your situation, I believe, qualifies. I would like to offer you our services. Ava sank onto her bed, her phone clutched in her hand. It felt like a dream. Pro bono representation from Croft, Bellows and Snyder was the legal equivalent of winning the lottery. Why? Ava asked, the single word full of suspicion and hope. Why would you do this for me? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Let's just say I have a deep and personal distaste for bullies, Ms. Croft said, a hint of steel in her voice, and a professional appreciation for talent. Your composure under fire suggested a mind that does not panic, a valuable quality in a client and a future lawyer. I am investing in a principle, Ms. Navarro, and perhaps in you. Could you meet me at my office tomorrow morning? Say, 10 o'clock. The next morning, Ava stood before a skyscraper in Midtown that seemed to pierce the clouds. The lobby was a symphony of marble and polished brass. In the elevator, she stood next to men and women in suits that cost more than her entire wardrobe. She felt like an imposter, but she straightened her spine and remembered her father's advice. You belong in any room you walk into. Genevieve Croft's office was on the 58th floor, with a panoramic view of Central Park that was so perfect it looked fake. The woman herself was even more formidable than she had sounded on the phone. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a salt and pepper bob cut with geometric precision. She wore a tailored suit that radiated quiet authority. She greeted Ava not with pity, but with the respect of a colleague. Ava, please come in. Coffee? For the next hour, Ava recounted the story, not as a panicked victim, but as she had written it in her memo. She was precise, factual, and unemotional. She detailed Vance's demeanor, the content of his phone call she had overheard, the exact sequence of the spill, and the words he and Dubois had used. Ms. Croft listened intently, her fingers steepled, not taking a single note. When Ava finished, she nodded slowly. Excellent, she said. Your recollection is clear and detailed. You've already identified the key legal issues. You have the mind for this work. She stood up and walked to her window, looking down at the city below. Now, we could file a lawsuit. It would be long, ugly, and expensive, even for us. Vance's lawyers would use every trick in the book to drag your name through the mud. They would dig into your past, your finances, your grades. They would try to break you. We would likely win eventually, but it would take years and cost you a piece of your soul. Ava's heart sank. Or, Ms. Croft said, turning back to face her, a shrewd glint in her eye, we could try something else, something faster, more elegant. Preston Vance values two things above all else, his money and his public image. A lawsuit threatens the former, but public humiliation, handled correctly, can be a mortal blow to the latter. He tried to humiliate you to assert his power. It's time to show him what real power looks like. What are you suggesting? Ava asked, leaning forward, her pulse quickening. I'm suggesting we skip the courtroom and go straight to the verdict, Ms. Croft said, with a thin, dangerous smile. He passed judgment on you in that restaurant. It seems only fair you be given the chance to do the same. First, we need leverage. You mentioned his phone call. What exactly did you hear? Ava's mind flashed back to the moment before the spill. He was talking about an acquisition. He said, "The acquisition is non-negotiable. We close by Friday, or I walk and burn his entire company to the ground." She also remembered the name he'd mentioned. "Richardson," he said. "You tell Richardson the due diligence phase is over." Miss Croft's eyes lit up with the predatory gleam of a shark scenting blood in the water. She strode to her desk and began typing furiously on her computer. Vance's company, Omnicorp, has been in quiet talks to acquire a smaller but highly innovative tech firm, Richardson Dynamics, she said, reading from a financial news service. "It's a multi-billion-dollar deal. It's also highly sensitive. Richardson's board is nervous. They are worried about a culture clash, about Vance's aggressive reputation. If a story were to break right now, say, a viral story about their potential new CEO being a violent, abusive monster who attacks wait staff, it could spook the board and scuttle the entire deal." She looked up from her screen, her eyes locking with Ava's. "He didn't just spill wine on you, Ms. Navarro. He handed you the keys to his kingdom." The plan was audacious, theatrical, and terrifying. Genevieve Croft called it a hostile negotiation. Ava called it the scariest thing she had ever considered doing. It involved no legal filings, no formal letters. It involved walking back into the lion's den. 2 days later, on a Thursday evening, Ava stood across the street from l'Orchidée d'Or. She was not wearing a waitress uniform. On Ms. Croft's instructions, she had used a credit card provided by the firm to purchase a simple, elegant, dark blue sheath dress. It was the most expensive piece of clothing she had ever owned. Her hair was pulled back in a neat chignon, and she wore a touch of makeup. She looked not like a waitress, but like a young associate on her way to a corporate dinner. She looked like she belonged. In her purse was her phone, a small, high-quality audio recorder Ms. Croft had given her, and a single folded piece of paper. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. "He's there," a text from Ms. Croft read. "Table 12, of course. He's dining with 2 men. The Richardson deal. I have a reservation for a party of 1 at the bar. The stage is yours. Remember the objective." The objective wasn't an apology. Not yet. The objective was to demonstrate power. Ava took a deep breath, crossed the street, and pushed open the heavy, ornate doors of the restaurant. The maitre d', a different man from the one on duty the night of the incident, approached her with a polite smile. "Good evening, madam. Do you have a reservation?" "No," Ava said, her voice steady. "I'm here to speak with Mr. Preston Vance." The maitre d's smile tightened. "Mr. Vance is in a private meeting. He cannot be disturbed." "Please inform him that Ava Navarro is here," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Tell him it's about the Chateau Margaux. He'll know what it means." The man hesitated, clearly torn between his duty to protect a VIP client and the unnerving authority in this young woman's voice. He scurried away toward the corner booth. Ava saw him lean in and whisper to Vance. She watched as Vance's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the room until they found her. His expression shifted from annoyance to disbelief, and then to a dark, simmering rage. He said something to the maitre d', who scurried back, his face pale. "Mr. Vance will not see you. I must ask you to leave." "I don't think so," Ava said calmly. She took her phone out of her purse, but didn't turn it on. "It was just a prop for now. Please tell him that if he doesn't speak with me for 5 minutes, I will be forced to share the details of his accident with the financial reporter I have on speed dial. I'm sure she'd be fascinated to hear about the conduct of the man trying to acquire Richardson Dynamics. I believe the Richardson board members are particularly interested in optics. She had repeated the exact words she'd heard him say on the phone. It was a calculated shot in the dark, and from the way the maitre d's eyes widened in panic as he relayed the message, she knew it had hit its mark. A moment later, he returned, defeated. Mr. Vance will see you, but only for a moment. Walking across that dining room was the longest walk of Ava's life. The hushed whispers started again, diners recognizing her from the incident. She ignored them. Her focus was entirely on the 3 men at table 12. Vance looked like he was ready to explode. The 2 other men, both older and clearly uncomfortable, were undoubtedly from Richardson Dynamics. Ava stopped at the edge of the table. She did not wait to be invited to speak. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice clear and professional. She nodded to the 2 other men before fixing her gaze on Vance. "Mr. Vance, my name is Ava Navarro. I was the server here on Tuesday evening." "I know who you are," Vance growled, his voice low and menacing. "You have 60 seconds to explain why I shouldn't have security throw you out on the street." "That won't be necessary," Ava said, her calm a stark contrast to his barely controlled fury. "I'm not here to cause a scene. In fact, I'm here to help you avoid one. As you know, an incident occurred here, which resulted in the loss of my employment and significant personal distress. It also resulted in damage to your suit, which I'm sure was very expensive." She slid the folded piece of paper across the table toward him. "That is the name and address of the finest dry cleaner in the city. I would be happy to cover the cost of restoring your jacket. Consider it a gesture of goodwill." Vance stared at the paper as if it were a scorpion. The 2 other men exchanged nervous glances. This was not what they had expected. "What is this?" Vance demanded. "Some kind of shakedown?" "Not at all," Ava replied smoothly. "This is a resolution. I believe in taking responsibility. When something is spilled, one cleans it up. That's why I'm here. Because a mess was made on Tuesday night. A very public, very ugly mess. And it needs to be cleaned up." Her meaning was clear. The mess wasn't just the wine. It was his behavior. "Unfortunately," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more serious, "other people saw the mess too. People with phones, people who blog and tweet, and reporters who are very interested in the leadership style of executives involved in major acquisitions. A story about a CEO who verbally abuses and physically accosts a service worker. Well, it's not a good look, is it? It suggests a certain volatility, a lack of control. Not the kind of thing a nervous board of directors wants to see before a multi-billion-dollar merger." Preston Vance's face went from red to a sickly white. She had said it all, right in front of his potential partners. She hadn't threatened him directly. She had simply laid out the facts, the cause and effect, as if explaining a simple legal principle. "I believe," Ava said, her gaze unwavering, "that a public gesture would go a long way toward cleaning this up for everyone. A gesture that demonstrates accountability and respect. I will be here at the bar for the next 30 minutes. I trust you will make the right decision." Without another word, she turned and walked to the bar, her back straight, her legs feeling like jelly. She sat down, ordered a glass of water, and did not look back. She could feel the heated, frantic energy from the corner booth. She had just thrown a grenade onto the most important negotiation of Preston Vance's career. Now, all she could do was wait to see if it would explode. From her seat at the bar, Ava watched the reflection of Table 12 in the large, gilt-edged mirror behind the rows of liquor bottles. It was a distorted, silent movie of a corporate implosion. Preston Vance, who moments before had been the picture of predatory confidence, was now visibly floundering. His face was a thunderous mask, but his hands gestured wildly, his posture defensive. The two Richardson executives were leaning back, their arms crossed, their expressions a mixture of shock and profound distaste. The power at that table had not just shifted, it had evaporated from Vance's side and condensed into a storm cloud of doubt over his head. Inside Preston Vance's mind, a frantic calculation was taking place. This girl, this nobody waitress, had just walked into his life for the second time and completely dismantled his authority. The first time was with her infuriating calm. This time, it was with a surgeon's precision. She hadn't just mentioned the deal, she had understood the delicate psychology of it. The Richardson brothers were old money, men who valued stability and reputation above all else. His move fast and break things ethos already made them nervous. A public scandal confirming their worst fears about his temperament would be catastrophic. He could feel the deal, the culmination of a year of ruthless maneuvering, slipping through his fingers. He had underestimated her. He had seen a uniform, not a person. He had seen an obstacle, not an intellect, and that miscalculation was about to cost him billions. He could have her thrown out, of course. But she had already planted the seed. The Richardson brothers had seen her, heard her. They had seen his reaction. Kicking her out now would only confirm her narrative. He was trapped. Preston, one of the executives, a man named Gerald Richardson, said coolly, breaking the tense silence. Perhaps we should postpone this discussion. It seems you have a more pressing matter to attend to. His tone was glacial. It was the voice of a man walking away from a deal. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Vance's rage. He had built his empire on the perception of invincibility. He never backed down. He never apologized. To do so now, in front of these men, felt like a public castration. But the alternative, losing the deal that would cement his legacy, was unthinkable. For the first time in his adult life, Preston Vance was truly, utterly defeated. Not by a corporate rival, not by a market downturn, but by a 23-year-old law student in a blue dress. He looked over at the bar. Ava was sipping her water, staring straight ahead at the mirror, at him. Her expression was neutral, impassive. She wasn't gloating. She was simply waiting. He finally understood the nature of her power. It wasn't aggression. It was an unshakable certainty in her own position. She had presented him with two doors. One led to his own destruction, paved with his pride. The other led to his salvation, paved with his humiliation. He made his choice. Slowly, as if his limbs were made of lead, Preston Vance pushed his chair back and stood up. The entire dining room, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell silent once more. Every eye was on him. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his jacket, and began the long walk from his table to the bar. Ava watched his reflection approach in the mirror. She kept her breathing even, her hands resting calmly on the polished wood of the bar. This was the critical moment. He stopped a few feet behind her. She did not turn around, forcing him to address her back. It was a subtle but powerful assertion of control. "Ms. Navarro," he said. His voice was strained, the word seemingly catching in his throat. Ava turned on her stool to face him. She did not smile. She simply waited. He looked at her, his stormy eyes filled with a complex cocktail of fury, respect, and utter helplessness. The Emperor had no clothes, and he knew it. "I was out of line on Tuesday," he began, the word sounding foreign and clumsy on his tongue. "My behavior was inexcusable. I was under a great deal of pressure, but that is no excuse for how I treated you." He glanced back at his table, where the Richardson brothers were watching his every move. He looked at the other diners, their faces rapt. He was the center of a drama he could no longer control. "I would like to offer you my sincerest apology," he said, the words costing him more than any bottle of wine ever could. "You did not deserve to be spoken to that way. The incident was my fault. I was not paying attention, and I caused the spill. Your subsequent termination was a grave injustice, and I will speak to Monsieur Dubois to ensure it is immediately rectified." Ava listened, her expression unchanging. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. It was a statement made under duress. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I appreciate you saying that. But your words were not spoken to me in private. They were shouted for the entire restaurant to hear. I believe the apology should have the same audience." A muscle twitched in Vance's jaw. She was turning the screw. She wanted more than a confession. She wanted a public penance. He was about to refuse, to tell her she had pushed her luck. But then he saw Genevieve Croft, who had been sitting quietly in a booth near the bar, catch his eye. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent confirmation that this was the only way out. She was the architect of this entire nightmare. Vance took a deep breath, letting it out in a long, shuddering sigh of surrender. He turned to face the dining room. He was a man accustomed to commanding rooms like this, to giving speeches at galas and conferences, but he had never felt so naked, so exposed. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" he said, his voice stronger now, but lacking its usual arrogant timbre. It was the voice of a man humbled. The room was already silent, waiting. "Many of you were here on Tuesday evening and witnessed an ugly incident involving myself and a member of the staff," he said, looking around the room. "I want to state for the record that my behavior was appalling and unacceptable. I treated a young woman, Ms. Ava Navarro, with disrespect and cruelty. The fault for the incident was entirely mine. I verbally abused her and had her unjustly fired. No one, regardless of their station in life, deserves to be treated that way. I am profoundly sorry for my actions and for the scene I caused. I hope you will all accept my apology, and I hope, most of all, that Ms. Navarro will accept it as well." He turned back to Ava. The speech was done. The humiliation was complete. In the mirror, Ava could see the Richardson brothers nodding slowly to each other. The deal was likely saved. Preston Vance had just paid for it with his pride. The aftermath of Preston Vance's public apology was as quiet and profound as the initial incident had been loud and jarring. A soft ripple of applause spread through the dining room, a mixture of relief and approval. Monsieur Dubois, who had been hovering near the kitchen doors looking ashen, rushed forward, his face a mask of frantic contrition. "Ms. Navarro, Ava," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Please accept my deepest apologies. Your job is, of course, yours. You can start back tomorrow, on any terms you wish." Ava looked at the manager, the man who had dismissed her as a problem to be dealt with. She saw not a villain, but a man trapped in a system that demanded he cater to power. "Thank you, Monsieur Dubois," she said politely. "But I won't be coming back." She turned her gaze to Preston Vance, who was still standing by the bar, looking like a man who had just survived a shipwreck. "Mr. Vance, your apology is accepted." With a nod to him and a final, grateful look toward Genevieve Croft, Ava slid off the bar stool, picked up her purse, and walked out of l'Orchidée door for the last time. She didn't look back. The next day, she met Ms. Croft in her office. The view of Central Park seemed even brighter. "You were magnificent," Ms. Croft said, handing Ava a cup of coffee. "You were firm, fair, and you never lost control of the situation. You have the makings of an exceptional lawyer." A courier arrived shortly after, delivering a large envelope from Preston Vance's legal team. Inside were two things. The first was a settlement offer. It was a staggering number, enough to pay for her entire law school tuition, her living expenses, and leave her with a comfortable cushion to start her life after graduation. It came with a non-disclosure agreement, which Miss Croft advised her was standard and fair. The amount wasn't just compensation, it was a clear message of thank you for not destroying his deal, a silent acknowledgement of the leverage she had held but not fully used. The second item was a handwritten note from Vance himself. The handwriting was sharp and angular, like his personality. Ms. Navarro, there is little I can add to what was said last night. You taught me a lesson I sorely needed to learn. Your integrity under pressure is something I haven't seen in a long time. I have enclosed a settlement that I hope you will find sufficient for the damages I caused. I have also made a substantial donation in your name to the Legal Aid Society, so that others without your personal strength can find the kind of representation you deserve. If you ever find yourself on the corporate side of the law after you graduate, my door is always open, though I suspect you will find your calling on the other side of the table. Sincerely, Preston Vance Ava read the note twice. It was as close to a genuine change of heart as a man like Vance was likely to get. He hadn't just been beaten, he had been forced into a moment of introspection. But the most important offer came not from Vance, but from Genevieve Croft. That settlement will secure your education, she said, gesturing to the envelope. But I have a different proposal for your career. My firm offers a paid internship program for first-year students over the summer. It's highly competitive. However, I am the head of the selection committee. I believe your recent, practical experience makes you an ideal candidate. The position is yours if you want it. Tears welled in Ava's eyes, but this time they were not tears of humiliation or fear. They were tears of overwhelming gratitude and relief. The future that had seemed so bleak just days ago was now laid out before her, brighter than she could have ever imagined. The story of what happened at Locher des Dours that week became an urban legend among the city's elite. The restaurant itself changed. Monsieur Dubois became fiercely protective of his staff, and a new rule was quietly implemented. Any patron who was verbally abusive to an employee would be politely asked to leave, regardless of who they were. The power dynamic had been rebalanced. Preston Vance closed his deal with Richardson Dynamics, but those who knew him said he was different. The volatile arrogance was tempered with a new, weary caution. He had looked over the edge of the cliff and seen his own reflection. As for Ava, she accepted the settlement and the internship. She excelled at the firm, her quiet composure and sharp legal mind earning her the respect of her colleagues. She never forgot the lessons from that night. The true strength isn't about how loud you can shout, but how calmly you can stand your ground. That justice isn't always found in a courtroom, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be broken. She had walked into that restaurant as a waitress, an invisible girl in a world of power and privilege. But she had walked out as the architect of her own future, having built a foundation that no storm could ever shake. That single, quiet moment, a calm reaction in the face of explosive rage, set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. It's a powerful reminder that strength isn't always about aggression or wealth. Sometimes the greatest power lies in quiet integrity, in knowing your worth even when the world tries to tell you you're worthless. Ava's story is about more than just spilled wine. It's about the hidden heroes we encounter every day. The server, the clerk, the assistant, people who navigate a world that often overlooks them, but who possess a core of resilience that could humble emperors. What would you have done in Ava's shoes? Have you ever witnessed a moment where quiet dignity triumphed over loud arrogance? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more true life dramas that reveal the extraordinary strength of ordinary people. Thank you for listening.